Our Sunday Roundtable is present and accounted for this morning. We're joined by Democratic political analyst Marianne Marsh and Republican political analyst Rob Gray. Great to see you guys.
Good morning.
Morning, Ed.
Thank you very much for joining us. We heard Congressman Lynch on impeachment and the 25th Amendment, and also there's been talk about possible action by the Justice Department. So at this point, Sunday morning, 10 days before the end of Trump's presidency, how realistic is each of them? Let's go to you, Rob, first.
I think the 25th Amendment is a dead issue. I think there's a lot of wishful thinking among the national media and Washington Democrats that could or will happen. I don't think it's going to happen. On impeachment, I think it's likely in the House. We heard what Congressman Lynch said, but it's really a matter of how much sand is left in the dial here. There's not much left. Will the Senate have a conviction vote, or will they play a clock game and let it run out, with just 10 days to go here?
Marianne, there's also been talk about the Justice Department investigating him. How much can you count on that, and also possibly the Senate trying to prevent Trump from ever running for office again, federal office anyways?
The fact is, Donald Trump needs to be removed from office today, and it could be done today. Mitch McConnell appoints judges every single day of the week for the last 10 years, okay? The reason we are here is because Richard Nixon wasn't punished. He was pardoned. Donald Trump asked Russia to help him in the 2016 election. He accepted that help, and he wasn't punished. Then he asked Ukraine to interfere in the 2020 election. He was impeached, but not removed. Then he went and asked election people across the country in states to interfere in this election. He was not punished. Then he asked United States senators and congressmen to interfere in our election last week, and he has yet to be punished. And then his supporters went to the Capitol. He led a coup as the president of the United States, and they went there to kill Mike Pence, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Grassley, number 2, 3, and 4 in the line of succession. So the only people left would be Trump and Pompeo. He needs to be removed today. Period, full stop. Impeached, removed today. Because if not, then everyone who refuses to do it is a traitor, and every member of the Senate, 8 of them, and the 143 members of Congress who, after being held captive, went back to the floor and voted against the Electoral College, need to be expelled. That is provided for in the Constitution. If this isn't impeachment, then why do we have it?
But I think the problem there with what Marianne says is Joe Biden asked this weekend about impeachment, punted on it. He's not even behind this now.
That's not true.
So it may well happen, but he hasn't endorsed it. The question was put to him, and he didn't endorse it.
He called them traitors, and he needs to leave a little bit of space to let Congress do its job. It is not Joe Biden's job to impeach Donald Trump. It is the job of every United States senator, every member of Congress, and if they don't do it, they are traitors. They are not on Team USA. It is that simple.
Next issue is Marty Walsh. This is the other big news this week. He is leaving to become Biden's labor secretary. The president-elect has been under a great deal of pressure to appoint a diverse cabinet. He even joked about it a day before he formally announced Walsh's nomination. Remember this?
I'm still looking for an Irishman.
Found one. Well, the other main candidate for the job was Julie Su of California. She and Walsh have very similar progressive records. So, Marianne, let me start with you. Why Marty Walsh? Why did Marty win this position?
I think Congressman Lynch did a really lovely job talking about how important it is that Marty Walsh got that job. The fact is, Marty Walsh has lived labor. It has been his life. He was a laborer. He was a union member. He was a union executive. Then he went to the State House and legislated labor laws. Then he was mayor and negotiated management and labor. So he knows what it's like. And I think in a time when we need to put everybody back to work and back on their feet, Marty Walsh wants to make sure that people do it, get a good job, good pay, and have their rights protected, which they aren't right now under Trump.
Rob?
I think Marty Walsh shares and the president share the same view on labor, and he got it on the merits here. At the same time, I think symbolically, Biden increased his vote with non-college educated white males by 6 points versus what Hillary Clinton got. He wants to lock that down. Those are the workers in America most likely to lose their jobs over the next 4 years, and I think he wants Marty Walsh to work on that and symbolically to appeal to those voters.
So the next step is obviously with Walsh leaving, what names ring loudest for who might join Andrea Campbell and Michelle Wu in this November's election, mayoral election. Let's start with you, Marianne.
I think two names that jump out of what I think is going to be a long, long list and a big group is State Rep Aaron Miklowicz, who's also chair of Ways and Means. He represents the North End and the South End. And John Santiago, the state rep, who would have been our guest today had this week not happened, who is also worked in the Peace Corps, military vet, emergency room doctor, and has a very bright future. I think those are two names to watch as this field keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Rob, what do you think?
It's a numbers game, not just the number of candidates, but the number of elections. We could have a year here where we have 4 different mayors or mayors-elect of Boston. That's what people have to remember. Marty Walsh right now. Kim Janey will be the acting mayor. We'll then have a special election to fill the seat, followed by a regular election in November. So you could have a flip-flopping of candidates, matches and rematches amongst the candidates. But I think John Santiago you have to look at as a new contender, and also Superintendent Gross. If he runs, he has some star power.
I think it depends when Marty has to resign. Will determine how many and when the elections are.
Right.
So let's talk about something else that happened in nationally, the state of Georgia, the election in Georgia. So now that it's filtered out and 2 Democrats have won in the state of Georgia, what does it mean for the 2 senators from Massachusetts with Chuck Schumer as the majority leader? Rob, let me start with you.
Well, it means more power, plain and simple. And, you know, when I look at Ed Markey having more power, I'm not thrilled about that. I think it's important to remember as we talk about the Electoral College and what happened and what the events of this week, that Ed Markey was one of 35 House members who voted against the electoral votes in Ohio in 2005 to give John Kerry the presidency instead of George Bush, had that state flipped. We need to keep that in mind as he gets more power. And as Democrats criticize Republicans for doing the same thing, I criticize Republicans for doing the same thing. But let's remember Ed Markey did it.
Marianne?
Well, I'm the last one to defend Ed Markey, but there's a big difference between voting in Ohio and a coup, and taking out our government and assassinating the leadership of our country.
He's the same as Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz.
Well, I hear you. Okay, I hear you. But on this matter, first of all, what a month this week has been. I didn't even get to celebrate Georgia, where I said I really felt that we could win both seats, and we did. And I think Warren's the one who's going to be in the position to make the most of it. No question about it. She knows how to push to get her agenda through, and she's going to work really, really hard, especially in the economic justice piece. So when you look at the precarious balance of the Senate, everyone looks at Manchin, Sinema, and everyone else. Watch Elizabeth Warren, because I think she's going to push people much, much further and make it very hard for people not to do more than they should.